I'm Ed Sceery. If you want to get started coyote howling like a pro, I'd encourage you to watch this video that I produced many years ago. I'll take you into the field with me to see, hear, and to hunt coyotes.
Welcome to Ed Sceery's Outdoor Classroom. A well-known authority on predator and big game hunting, Ed is a registered outfitter and president of Sceery Game Calls in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Sit back and get comfortable as Ed talks about coyote howling and how you can use a coyote howler to increase the success on your next hunt.
Hi, I'm Ed Sceery. I've been hunting coyotes for over 30 years, and during this time, I've called several thousand coyotes. What I want to do today is talk to you about the coyote language, about howling for coyotes, about how you can use a coyote howler call to both locate the position of coyotes and to call coyotes in for a good close shot. My goal today is to make you a better coyote hunter. The coyote is one of the most interesting animals in North America, and he's believed to have lived on the continent for the past 14,000 years. He was given the scientific name Canis latrans, which means barking dog. Now, there are about 19 known subspecies of coyotes, and there's only minor differences between the different coyotes. One particular difference that's interesting to hunters is the size of the coyotes. The eastern coyote is considerably larger than the western coyote. Eastern coyotes living in New England and eastern Canada will average in weight around 40 pounds, while western coyotes, they typically average between 20 and 25 pounds. Now, we have some coyotes in the Rocky Mountains we call mountain coyotes, and they'll average closer to 30 to 35 pounds. Now, generally, there's not very many differences other than the size of the eastern and western coyotes that make any difference to hunters. And then, no matter where you hunt in the United States, whether it's in Alabama, California, New Hampshire, or Maine, the coyotes are generally quite similar. And the coyote vocalizations are quite similar. Now, coyotes generally stand about 2 feet tall at the shoulder, and they're about 4 feet long. Most coyotes have fur that is either a gray to a reddish brown in color. Now, some coyotes will appear almost white, and some almost black. I've never seen a jet black coyote, nor have I ever seen an all-white coyote. But you'll see quite a bit of difference in the variation of the color of coyotes. In the summer, the coyote's fur is short and stiff, and it's not very attractive. It's only the prime winter coyotes that make the best fur. And coyote fur typically is prime in the month of December. The coyote is an exceptionally good hunter, and he has highly developed senses of hearing, eyesight, and smell. He's a much better hunter than you or I. So when we hunt coyotes, we can't out-hunt them. What we have to do is we have to outsmart them. And that's how you can become a successful coyote hunter, learning the tricks of coyote hunting and learning how to outsmart a coyote. Now, the coyote's not selective in what he eats. He eats anything that's available to him. Coyotes feed on all kinds of game animals, from antelope to deer. In the winter, they'll take down elk. They particularly enjoy feeding on the smaller animals, rabbits, rodents, mice and rats, and they eat a lot of insects. In the summer, we see coyotes feeding on a lot of grasshoppers and other bugs. Another thing that's interesting about the coyote's appetite is that he loves to eat snakes, and I've seen coyotes catch and eat a lot of snakes. When coyotes eat rattlesnakes, they have a particular technique for grabbing it by the tail and shaking it until they break the snake's neck and kill the snake so they don't get bit. Coyotes also eat a lot of other things other than animals and insects and snakes. They eat a lot of vegetables. In the western states here, the farmers grow a lot of chili, and the coyotes will get out in the chili fields and eat the chili. In areas where they grow watermelons, coyotes will get out into the watermelon patches and ruin a whole crop of watermelons by taking a bite or two out of each one. Coyotes often pair up with a member of the opposite sex and remain as a pair. They breed in late winter, usually about the third week of February, and about 60 days later, they have their litter of pups. The litter of puppies may range from anywhere from 3 to 7 or 8 pups. But generally, there's 4 or 5 or 6 in a litter. They raise the puppies in a hole in the ground that we call a den. And while coyotes are pregnant during the springtime, the coyotes are generally digging quite a few dens to have available for their pups. And we've seen coyotes dig 10 or 20 den sites within a mile during the spring. Now, while coyotes are raising their litter for the first few weeks in a den, if anybody disturbs the den site, or if the coyotes feel that's a dangerous place, what they'll do is they'll take the puppies out during the night and they'll move them one at a time to one of the other den sites. Occasionally, 2 females will use the same den and they'll raise the puppies together. Or they'll use adjacent dens and there'll be two coyote den sites within just 50 or 100 feet. The majority of the feeding and care of the pups is done by their parents, and it's common for several other coyotes in the family group to assist with the activities of guarding the den and bringing food back for the puppies. Now let's get on to the coyote's voice and howling for coyotes. In order to learn to howl, you need to know some of the theory behind howling and the basis for what makes howling for coyotes an effective way to identify their location and call them into your position. Most coyotes travel in a certain area during their daily activities. This area is most often referred to as their home range. Within this home range, they have a specific territory which they claim and they call their own. As coyotes travel through their guarded territory, they mark and identify the boundaries to let other coyotes know that the area is off limits to them. They make their mark by urinating on small rocks, bushes, or clumps of grass. And these marks are typically referred to as scent posts. And if you get the opportunity to go out and watch coyotes during their daily travels, you'll see they are constantly marking scent posts around their territorial boundaries. The basis for what makes howling work is that coyotes defend their territory from any strange coyotes that come into it. So if a coyote hears or detects a strange coyote in his territory, his natural instinct is to go and investigate that coyote, and if he doesn't particularly care for him, there'll be a fight and he'll try to run the coyote out of his territory. So you as a coyote howler will go out and you'll make coyote sounds in an effort to convince a coyote that you're a strange coyote in his territory. And if you can do that, you can expect that the natural instinct of a coyote that hears that will be to come and investigate the source of the sound, which would be you. And so that's the theory behind coyote howling, and it's what makes coyote howling so effective. The key is to know the right vocalizations to make, and then be able to go out and make those sounds in order to fool a coyote and let him think that you're a strange coyote in his territory. Now let's talk about the voice of the coyote, his ability to communicate, and what we think he's saying. With a call and the knowledge of what kind of sounds or coyote vocalizations to make with that call, we can communicate directly with coyotes for the purpose of identifying their location and to call them into close range. Those of you who have domestic dogs can learn a lot about coyote vocalizations. The vocalizations of both coyotes and domestic dogs have some very close similarities. We know that coyotes make at least 12 different sounds when they communicate with one another. But from the standpoint of the hunter, we only have to learn a number of these sounds, and these are the ones that coyotes use when they call other coyotes to locate their position, or when they call other coyotes in the effort of getting the coyotes to come toward them. And these are the sounds that we want to learn to make with a coyote howler. You'll find that there's only a few of these sounds that we'll need to learn, and you'll find that they're relatively easy to make with the Sceery Coyote Howler. Coyotes make two different kinds of sounds when they communicate. They make barks and they make howls. And the various vocalizations of coyotes are often combinations of barks and howls. And you'll need to learn a few of these combinations to be a good coyote howler. And it'll be helpful for you to know these sounds when you're hunting coyotes. Now, coyotes make two different kinds of barks. The first I describe as an aggressive bark, and the second one is a non-aggressive bark. And these are very distinct sounds, and it's easy to tell whether it's an aggressive bark or a non-aggressive bark. Those of you who have dogs at home will easily recognize these different barks. A dog will bark at a mailman or an intruder in the house with a very aggressive sounding bark, where he may bark or signal another dog in the neighborhood with a non-aggressive bark. So listen to your dog and that will help. Let's take a listen right now and listen to a coyote making some loud, aggressive barking sounds. One characteristic of an aggressive bark is that it's very loud, it's very coarse, and it's very distinct, which is different from the non-aggressive barks of a coyote. So again, let's listen to a couple aggressive barks. Now let's talk about non-aggressive barks. Non-aggressive barks are distinctly different from aggressive barks from several standpoints. One is they're not as loud, they're not as coarse, and the sound is not constant with the non-aggressive bark. The volume of non-aggressive barks taper off as the coyote makes them. So let's listen to a non-aggressive barking sound made by a coyote. Now let's talk about coyote howls. Just like the barks, I recognize two different distinctive kind of howls that coyotes make. The first one I call a flat howl. It's a howl of constant pitch, and it doesn't change very much. It may taper off a little at the end, but not too much. Let's listen to a coyote that's making a flat howl. Okay, the second kind of howl that coyotes make, we call a fluctuating howl, because that's exactly what it does. The pitch of the howl fluctuates as he makes the howling sound. It's a real distinct and easily identifiable howl. Let's listen to a coyote making a fluctuating howl. Well, okay, now we've talked about aggressive barks and non-aggressive barks and flat howls and fluctuating howls. These are four different kind of sounds that coyotes make, and they're very easy to distinguish from one another. If you hear a flat howl, you'll know what it is. If you hear a fluctuating howl, you'll be able to recognize that too. If you hear an aggressive bark, you'll know it's an aggressive bark, and if you hear a non-aggressive bark, you'll know it's a non-aggressive tapering off bark. So that's pretty simple, right? Well, that part's pretty simple, but the problem is that coyotes combine the different barks and howls when they make vocalizations to communicate with one another. And the different combinations will relay different information. And you need to know some of the different combinations. So let's go ahead and talk about some of the different coyote vocalizations that are combinations with barks and howls. The first thing that we'll talk about is the most commonly heard coyote vocalization, and it's called a lone howl. It's not that the coyote's lonely, it's that he's by himself making a howl all alone. And this is what a lone howl sounds like. Typically a lone howl starts out with one or two short barks, and then it goes into a flat howl. Let's listen to a coyote making a flat howl. So the lone howl is a flat howl that usually has one or two short barks in front of it. Super easy for you to identify. You know what it means. It means, hello, who's out there? And it will get a response from a nearby coyote. The interesting thing and the important thing about a lone howl is the response of coyotes that hear it. If one coyote makes a lone howl, the other one answers him, they approach one another. So they may be a mile away. Coyote answers the first coyote, and then he starts to approach that coyote. Now, in coyote howling, if we go out and we make a lone howl, we get a coyote to answer us, we can be relatively sure that he's approaching us. Now, they don't always answer lone howls. They may just hear a lone howl. If you go out and you say, hello, who's out there? He may not answer you, but he still may approach you. So when you howl for coyotes, whether or not you get an answer, it's important for you to know that the coyote may be approaching you. If you get an answer, you can be really sure he's coming. If you don't get an answer, you can't be that sure, but there's a very good possibility he will still come. And we've seen this many, many times when we're out studying coyotes. We'll go out and make a lone howl. While we're watching a coyote, he won't answer us, but he'll approach us. And so one important thing to remember when you're howling is just because you don't get an answer doesn't mean that a coyote is not approaching you or has not heard you. Another very similar vocalization of coyotes is what we call a group howl. A group howl is more than one coyote that's making lone howls. So if we have 2 or 3 coyotes together and each one of the separate coyotes is making a lone howl, we call that vocalization a group howl. Now let's listen to some coyotes making a group howl together. Now this group howl, we believe, has the same meaning as a lone howl. And so often we'll make a lone howl, we'll get a group of coyotes to make lone howls back at us. Again, we can be relatively sure that those coyotes are going to approach us. Very similar vocalization to the lone howl, but a group howl is made by 2 or more coyotes. Now let's talk about another type of vocalization made by coyotes where they combine different sounds. This is called a group yip howl. A group yip howl is, again, several coyotes making vocalizations at the same time. And it's a more intense vocalization than a group howl. And it has a little different meaning. Remember, the lone howl and the group howl was one of these, hello, who's out there, or where are you? Well, a group yip howl has a different meaning. A group yip howl is a vocalization made by a group of coyotes to identify the location of their territory to other coyotes in other nearby territories. Let's listen to a group yip howl. This is a very, very common vocalization that I'm sure many of you have heard. Okay, when you go out to howl for coyotes, you go out, you make a lone howl. Whoop, whoop, little short bark and a flat howl. You're asking, is anybody out there? You may get a single coyote to answer you with a lone howl back, and he'll approach you. You may get 2 or 3 coyotes answer you with a group howl, and they will begin their approach to you. Or you may get a number of coyotes answer you with a group yip howl. These coyotes have identified their territory to you, and they will be very aggressive in coming to investigate you. They think you're a strange coyote in their territory. So when you make a lone howl to call coyotes, you may get a lone howl answer, you may get a group howl answer, or you may get a group yip howl answer. All 3 of those sounds, when you hear those as an answer to your call, I want you to sit back and smile because you've fooled them. You've convinced those coyotes that you're a strange coyote in their territory, and their natural instinct is to come over and investigate you. Now let's talk about another vocalization. This particular vocalization, when you hear it, won't make you smile like some of the others. This is what you don't want to hear. In this vocalization is a warning bark howl. A coyote makes this sound when he's figured you out. When you tried to fool him but you didn't, and he knows you're a threat to him, or you're a danger to other coyotes in the area. And when he figures you out, or he's smelled you or seen you or heard you, he'll make a warning bark howl. And a warning bark howl is telling all other coyotes in the area that you present a danger. And when you hear this sound, you might as well pack it up and move on to another place. If I have a coyote come up to a couple hundred yards, stop, make a warning bark howl, I get pretty upset about it. I go back and get in my pickup truck and I drive at least 5 miles before I make another stand. And the reason I go so far is because this coyote has alerted all the coyotes in the area that something's not right here, and they're very reluctant to come in when they've heard a warning bark howl. Let's listen to a coyote making a warning bark howl. This is an aggressive bark followed by a fluctuating howl. The warning bark howl is really easy to recognize when you hear it. The fluctuating howl is the giveaway. You'll hear a number of aggressive barks, but in the series of calls that the coyote's making, he will have a number of fluctuating howls. And typically the coyote will be 100 or 200 yards away, where he's had the opportunity to hear you, see you, or smell you. And so when you hear this particular sound, don't smile, don't get mad, hang it up, go back in your pickup, and go to another place to try it again. So always be on the alert and listen for a coyote on the approach, or even the first response from your lone howl. Listen for a coyote, the possibility that he will make a warning bark howl. If you've made a warning bark howl, you've screwed up, and you're not going to call him in. Typically, you won't call him in. Once in a great while, I'll call one, but if I've got a coyote making a warning bark howl at me, generally what I'll do is pack up and leave and won't spend any more time trying to call that particular coyote. Okay, now a quick review of what we talked about. We talked about aggressive barks and non-aggressive barks. We've talked about lone howls, group yip howls, and warning bark howls. Let's try another combination of howls. One is called a threat bark howl. A threat bark howl is a bark followed by several high-pitched howls. And I want you to, this is another really easy to identify coyote vocalization, a threat bark howl. Now listen to this sound. When a coyote approaches an intruder into his territory, he has a choice. He can charge right in to fight with the intruder, or he can stand back at 100 yards or so and threaten him with his voice. People do that same thing. Instead of punching it out with the guy, you may just yell at him and try to bluff him. That's what the coyote's doing with a threat bark howl. He's threatening you, don't come in my territory. He's threatening you, you better get out of my territory. He's trying to bluff you. It's a great fun game. What you do is you mimic his sound and you try to threaten him and tell him you're not going to leave. You're threatening him right back. It's great fun coyote howling, and you get really good response from it. I want you to look at this short sequence. I was out calling a month or so ago, and I was just stopping on the side of the road to see if I could locate some coyotes with a lone howl, and there was a coyote that was 50 yards or 80 yards away from me that responded to me with a threat bark howl, and I was talking to him for a while, and I want you to listen to this. This is something you may run across. Again, if you hear a coyote make a threat bark howl, he's coming into you. And so you keep working him until he gets in close enough for you to get a good shot. Typically, a coyote that's making a threat bark howl at you, he'll stick around for a while and move in a little closer to you. Now let's talk about how you can make these different coyote vocalizations with a coyote howler. We make two different kind of coyote howlers. We make an open reed howler, which has got an open reed that you bite on with your teeth, and a megaphone to amplify the volume of it. And we also make a thick latex diaphragm mouth call howler. Now, to make the diaphragm call louder when we're calling, we can use this part of the open reed howler as a megaphone. It's not necessary for you to use it. You don't have to use it, but it will double the volume of your howls. Now, one thing I haven't mentioned is how loud coyotes howl. And coyotes are extremely loud, and you can hear a coyote howl about 2 miles away. When I call a coyote and he answers me with a howl, if I can just barely hear the howl, I know he's about 2 miles away. If I can hear the howl but it's not really loud, he's about 1 mile away. If I hear a coyote and he's answering me, his howl sounds pretty loud to me, I know he's within about 1/4 to 1/2 mile away. And so you can learn to listen to the volume of the coyote howls and how far away that coyote is when he makes it. Let's demonstrate how you make some of the vocalizations with these calls. Let's try the open reed call, and we'll make a lone howl with it. Remember, a lone howl is 2 short barks, 1 or 2 short barks, followed by a flat howl. We can change the pitch if we like and make it a little lower. That would be more closely related to an older, more aggressive coyote. Or you can make it higher pitched. And typically what I do is I make a lone howl with a couple barks and a flat, low-pitched howl. When I make lone howls, I generally make 2. I make the first one with a couple barks and a howl, and I make the second one with just a flat howl. And that's all there is to making a lone howl with an open reed howler. Now, it'll take you a little practice to learn how to do this. Put it in your mouth, and you're going to rub your teeth right on the top of the reed lightly. And when you change the position of your teeth, it's going to change the pitch of the sound. For barks, I just bounce my lips into my teeth lightly on it when I huff the air through the call. For howls, I slide my teeth along the reed. First, when you get an open reed howler, practice to learn to make different sounds with it. Run your teeth up and back and forth on the reed like this. And all I'm doing is changing the pitch by changing the length of the part of the reed that works. Pretty easy to do. Barks, I just huff through it, bounce my lips, basically my lips on the reed. Sometimes my teeth will touch the reed, but just bounce it. For barks. So let's make a lone howl. You go out, you make a lone howl, you're going to get a lone howl response, a group howl response, a group yip howl response, or one of the others. Okay, now let's talk about how you use a mouth diaphragm call to howl for coyotes. Pull the megaphone end off your open reed howler and take the diaphragm. If you've already used diaphragm calls before for elk or turkey, you'll find this relatively easy. If you've never used a diaphragm before, you may find it pretty difficult. When I teach people to use diaphragm calls, I find some of the people will pick it up in the first 5 minutes they try it. Others may take them a couple months or a couple years before they figure it out. So it's kind of an individual thing. It may be that you pick it up in 5 minutes. It may be that it takes you a couple years to learn how to use a diaphragm call properly. When we use a diaphragm call for coyotes, for howling for coyotes, it's a little different technique of where you place your tongue on the latex. And so those of you that have called turkeys and have called elk will still require a little bit of time and practice to perfect the howling technique. So let's try to make a lone howl with a diaphragm. We place it to the top of our mouth with the round horseshoe side in and the red latex down. We put our tongue up against it and we blow air between our tongue and the latex reed, and we vibrate the reed as we blow air across it. The first sounds you want to try to make is this, just to make sure you can operate the reed. So the reed works, and we know the technique a little bit, and then let's put a little more pressure on it. Learn how to put a little pressure on the reed. Now let's try some barks, and we'll bounce our tongue off the bottom of the reed, and we'll huff when we make barks. Let's do it with the megaphone because it's twice as loud. Aggressive barks. They're coarse, they're loud, they're very distinct. Let's make some non-aggressive barks. Can you hear the difference between aggressive barks and non-aggressive barks with the mouth call? Let's try a lone howl with the mouth call. Remember, 1 or 2 barks and a flat howl. Normally I make 2 of those. I make 2 lone howls, set and wait. So it's individual preference whether you want to use a diaphragm mouth call to howl with coyotes, or if you want to use the open reed call to call and howl for coyotes. Now, I will tell you a couple things about these. One is if we use an open reed howler like this, we make a couple lone howls and listen to them, and we use a mouth call. And we make a couple lone howls, which one sounded better to you? Without question, the diaphragm call sounds better than the open reed call. It does to me too, when I'm sitting right here. What we found is if you go out and set up a tape recorder at a quarter of a mile away from you and you listen to them, you'll find at a distance the open reed howler sounds better than the mouth call. And so that's one thing I want you to be aware of. The other thing I want you to be aware of is that no matter which one of the 2 you choose to use, the important thing is that you make the right sound. If you make a lone howl with an open reed howler, or you make a lone howl with a diaphragm mouth call, make the right sound, and it won't have any difference on the success you have calling coyotes. If you can't use a diaphragm call, you use an open reed call, I expect you to have good luck. If you prefer to use a mouth call, I expect you to have good luck. We don't see any difference in the response of coyotes whether we choose to use a mouth call or an open reed call. They both work equally well, and we can't see any difference in the response of coyotes to the different calls. So whichever one you choose, we expect you to have good luck using. Let's talk a little bit about the different hunting techniques or the specific hunting techniques that you want to use when you're using a coyote howler. Well, generally, all of the hunting techniques that we rely on when hunting coyotes with a predator call, we use when we're hunting with a coyote howler. And these are basically what you want to do is you want to remain hidden and as quiet as you can. You want to approach your stand as quietly as you can. You want to just remain motionless and quiet at your stand. You want to pick stands that you can that are in the shade, where you can sit in the shade. You want to face downwind when you hunt coyotes. That's with the wind on your back blowing out in front of you. Now I know that may be a little different than what some of you have heard in the past, but from my experience, that's the best way to call coyotes. Now normally when we're hunting other big game animals like elk or deer, we want the wind on our face when we're hunting them. But with coyotes, it's the opposite. We want the wind on our back. And I know the first question that will come to your mind is, well, aren't the coyotes going to smell us and leave? Well, not if I get a chance to shoot them first, they won't. And that's what I normally do. I get a shot at them off before they scent me and take off. Now recognize that coyotes, when they respond to a howler or a predator call, will typically try to circle downwind of the sound. And so they're typically going downwind of you. And it's very predictable behavior of coyotes when you call coyotes. They're going to circle downwind of you. If you're facing downwind, you will see them. If you're facing upwind, you won't see nearly as many coyotes. And so when you're out hunting coyotes, pay particular attention to the wind, and if at all possible, call with the wind on your back facing downwind. When you go out hunting in the morning, it's a good idea for you to face west with the sun on your back. That way, coyotes that you call will have the sun in their eyes when they approach you. It'll make it more difficult for them to see you. I normally drive a mile, at least a mile, between the different stands that I make when I'm calling coyotes. Depends on the country I'm calling. If I'm calling in hilly or mountainous country, I'll drive a mile. If I'm calling in wide open country, I will typically drive as far as 2 miles. I think the critical thing when determining how far between stands you drive is to go to the next good spot. If the next good spot's a mile away, fine. If the next good spot is 3 or 4 miles away, well, you may have to drive 3 or 4 miles. Now, when I go coyote calling in the morning, I want to make my first stand of the day just as soon as it's light enough to see. And I want to make a stand about every 20 minutes all morning long. And if I do that, it gives me I get a chance to call 10 or 12 places or even 14 places between sunup and noon. And so I've had 14 opportunities to call coyotes. And calling coyotes with a howler or a predator call is a game of numbers. The more chances that you take, the greater the probability that you're going to call a coyote. And so I want you to pay particular attention to making as many stands as you can. How many coyotes can you expect to call? Well, I can't answer that question. It depends on how many coyotes are in the area that you call. I talk to people from all over the country, and there's some areas of the country that have very few coyotes, and those hunters there will call very few coyotes. Some areas of the country I talk to hunters, they call as few as 1 coyote a day. And the places that I go and hunt, I normally call 1 coyote for every 2 stands that I make. And the reason I'm that successful is not that I'm a great hunter and not that I'm a great caller. I've had some experience hunting and calling, but the reason I can call that many is because I pick places that have lots of coyotes. I know there's lots of coyotes in the areas, and then I use my calling and my hunting skill to work for me. I wouldn't expect a newcomer to call, even in an area with a lot of coyotes, 1 coyote on every other stand, but I would expect a newcomer to the sport, if you're hunting in an area that has a good number of coyotes, I would certainly expect you to call 1 or 2 coyotes a day. If you go out 6 different days and you make 12 stands a day, you should have called a number of coyotes. I'd like you to take a minute now and watch a setup that I made recently and how I do it when I sit down and howl and call for coyotes. This will give you an idea of exactly what I do when I sit down to howl and call coyotes.
Ed recommends that you conceal your vehicle so that an approaching coyote won't be able to see it. He prefers to sit up against a bush or tree and in the shade when possible. He checks his watch before he starts calling and usually plans to spend 10 to 15 minutes at each stand. Ed starts out with 2 lone howls. Then he waits several minutes, remaining quiet and motionless, while he listens for a response from a coyote and watches the area for an approaching animal. After a couple of minutes, he chooses a predator call and makes a series of distress cries. Within a minute after blowing his predator call, he spots 2 coyotes charging in his direction. The first coyote stopped at about 80 yards, almost directly in front of him, and offered a perfect shot. Startled by the shot, the second coyote didn't stick around. He put it in high gear and headed for parts unknown. While coyotes can be called with either a howler call or a predator call, Ed has discovered that using both calls in combination is the most productive way to call coyotes. Start out with 2 lone howls, then use your predator call. Blow a series of distress cries about every 2 minutes after making your first howls. If you haven't gotten a response in 8 or 10 minutes, make another single lone howl and continue your predator calling.
Before I go today, I'd like to remind you to respect the rights of private property owners, follow your local game and fish laws, and above all, be careful with your firearms and other weapons. Again, this is Ed Sceery in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I wish you the best of luck on all your hunts.
For more information and a full color catalog of the Sceery line of professional game calls, write Sceery Game Calls, P.O. Box 6520, Santa Fe, New Mexico 87502, or call toll-free 1-800-327-4322.